tenured associate professor. Now, in relating my experiences here, I am providing an example, an excellent, I believe, example of affirmative action, what I like to call affirmative opportunity, based on the use of flexible criteria of evaluation. As Morris Janowitz, the chair of the department, then told me that when they first read my articles prior to my lecture, they realized I had potential, and rather than eliminating me early in the review process, they decided to give me a chance to complete my book to confirm this initial impression. And Janowitz informed me that they wanted to move quickly because, given the growing interest in hiring faculty of color at elite research-oriented universities, they were fearful that competing universities would rush to hire me, and that's true. But they didn't have the same criteria that Chicago had. I had to offer tenure at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, without a book. Now, when I talk about flexible criteria of evaluation as applied to faculty of color, I would include evaluative criteria that gauge a candidate's potential to succeed. Potential to succeed. In my case, their initial assessment of my potential turned out to be correct. In a recent book, the historian Thomas Segru of the University of Pennsylvania probably put it best, quote, "In 1972, the University of Chicago had hired a young, relatively unknown black sociologist, William Julius Wilson. Wilson was a bit of a gamble for a hidebound institution like Chicago, with relatively few black faculty members and, despite its location, a small number of black students. Wilson lacked the Ivy League credentials, the European pedigree, the Chicago degrees of most of the university faculty. But the gamble paid off. Wilson's 1978 book, The Declining Significance of Race, was a rare, scholarly study that won both academic acclaim and wide non-academic readership," unquote. Thus, when I talk about flexible criteria of evaluation as applied to faculty of color, I would include evaluative criteria to gauge a candidate's potential to succeed. And in my case, their initial assessment of my potential turned out to be correct. Now, I'm going to say a few things here. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bragging. I'm trying to drive a point home here, okay? So their initial assessment of my potential turned out to be correct. I was eventually awarded the National Medal of Science, the highest scientific award in the United States, because Sweden awards the Nobel Prize. I was a recipient of recipients of the National Medal of Science are selected by a 13-member committee from the National Academy of Sciences, who then send their recommendation to the White House. The Nobel laureate economist Kenneth Arrow, who chaired the committee, told me that the major reason I received the award was because of my innovative approach to the study of urban poverty, most clearly reflected in my book, The Truly Disadvantaged, which developed a paradigm on the interaction of race, class, and location, a paradigm that influenced race across social science disciplines, even research in microeconomics, and is one of the most widely cited books in the last half-century. Over 3,500 citations. Now, I say all this not to brag about or highlight my own accomplishments, but to simply draw from my experiences to illustrate how affirmative opportunity can work in an ideal sense. Indeed, the concept of affirmative opportunity acknowledges that something more than offering legal equality is required to overcome the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. As a society, we must have the continuing moral obligation to compensate for the enduring burdens, the social and psychological damage of segregation, discrimination, and bigotry. A policy of affirmative opportunity would renew the nation's commitment to enable all Americans, regardless of income, race, or other attributes, to achieve the highest level that their abilities will permit. To repeat, it is so important to pay very careful attention to how one frames a discussion of affirmative action. Framing is very, very important. And I would like to sort of give an example of framing with the Barack Obama race speech, but I don't have the time to do that because I see that I'm already over my time. So I would like to conclude my lecture by briefly discussing a very successful program that represents a model for opportunity enhancing programs designed to help disadvantaged people of color, which I would like to include under the general category of affirmative opportunity. And that is the Harlem Children's Zone. The Harlem Children's Zone attempts to achieve what the social philosopher James Fiskin calls equality of life chances. Students, remember that term. Equality of life chances. According to this principle, equality of life chances, if we can predict with a high degree of accuracy where individuals will end up in a competition for preferred positions in society, merely by knowing their family background, race, or gender, then the conditions that affect or determine their motivations and talents are grossly unequal. Supporters of this principle believe that a person should not be able to enter a hospital ward of healthy newborn babies and accurately predict their eventual social and economic position in society solely on the basis of their race and or economic class origins. And you can do that in a lot of hospitals in inner city neighborhoods. Unfortunately, this is true. Supporters of the principle of equality of life chances feel that it is unfair that some individuals in our society receive every conceivable advantage while others, from the day they are born, never really have a chance to develop their talents. Now, the Harlem Children's Zone, which, when I think of equality of life chances, I think of the Harlem Children's Zone. The Harlem Children's Zone was developed by the visionary Jeffrey Canada, whose mission was to flood a number of blocks in Harlem, as you all know, an inner city community in New York City, with educational, social, and medical services to create a comprehensive safety net for the children in that area. More specifically, the Harlem Children's Zone is a 97-block laboratory in central Harlem that combines two reform-oriented public charter schools with a web of community services designed for children from birth to college graduation in order to provide a supportive and positive social environment outside the schools. Canada was able to get corporate leaders to support him. In 2009, the Harlem Children's Zone had nearly $200 million in assets and a fiscal year budget of roughly $84 million, two-thirds of which is based on corporate funding. How many of you saw the Harlem Children's Zone featured on 60 Minutes? The Harlem Children's Zone features over 20 programs that represent community investments to help empower individuals who live in these 97 blocks. Included in these investments are childhood programs such as Head Start, after-school programs such as tutoring, dance, and karate, family health, and community programs. And one notable program one notable community program